Welcome to the series finale of the season of lectures. We're going to be talking about quantum decoherence, multiverse theory, and consciousness. I should have said multidimensionality. We're in some interesting times right now. I live in the US, and I think people can infer it from there. So we're going to kind of bring all the topics from previous lectures together. And the best way to learn is not to logically know, but to embody, right? So let's get into what that means. With the topics that are going to be covered, we'll have multiverse theory with the esoteric wisdom, multiverse theory from M theory, collective consciousness, where we combine the human mind and the universe's mind as one, quantum decoherence and maybe returning to coherence and what that looks like, levels of consciousness, disembodiment in healthcare from things that are awakening, escape velocity of our current reality, and with all of this, my deep ask for everyone to read in between the lines of what I'm saying. Let's go into the historical philosophy on multiverse theory. So you guys know I'm a tantric philosopher, so I'll be looking at tantra philosophy. So there is this vibratory cosmic superposition, and we kind of refer to it in Hindu cosmology as an ocean of consciousness. And there's this quantum foam from Western ideology that talks about, these bubblings. And in the ocean of consciousness, as per Hindu cosmology, multiple Hiranyagarbhas are birthed here. They're multiple cosmic eggs, and they all have their own universe. They also have their own Brahma, Vishnu, Shiva, which just means that for each universe, everything that ever exists, the only fundamental principle that is followed in all of them is creation, preservation, and destruction. So, with this kind of understanding, I would actually like to add an asterisk to the current Big Bang theory. I actually believe it's more of an emergence dissolution model, and it's been on my mind for the past couple months. So, if we take creation, preservation, and destruction, and this infinite field that contains quantum foam, if you think about a field and like vibrating movement, right? And movement and vibration implies oscillation. Oscillation implies waves, and with waves constantly moving, you're bound to run into constructive interference. And so, from my perspective, it's likely the case. So, constructive interference would look like waves kind of crashing and kind of, gaining amplitude, right? And it can fizzle away, whatever. But at some point in randomized infinite time, enough constructive interference can give rise to enough of this quantum buildup from this foamular area, so to speak, where it takes on some classical properties, the very first ones, leading to the birth of cosmic eggs. Like that's how I sort of envision it. Like it gets big enough to where it has a little bit of mass. Maybe we can't perceive it, but long, long ago, it is exactly what has quite literally birthed the universe as we know it today. As far as destruction is done and entropy is complete, meaning that stagnation takes place in the cosmos, right? There's nothing that can be transformed anymore because everything that needs to be created and has moved through all of its evolution has already taken place. So it goes and everything's always, breaking down. So once you get into your most minute constituents, I envision it becoming so, so small that the cosmos as we know it, with everything that's ever been created, it just sort of dissolves back into this vibratory field, that ocean of consciousness. And decoherence is a really big topic. So let's talk about the first act of cosmic decoherence. If you haven't heard of the Vigyan Bhairav Tantra text, it is basically this storytelling metaphor of how the cosmos have formed, and it also contains 112 meditations on how to self-realized God consciousness within. But basically, it's like a love letter between Shiva and Shakti taking place. So they're talking about, to me at least, it translates to moving from shunya, which is the void, nothing, and zero, to my version of the emergence model of the cosmos. And that really can only happen moving away from total unity, and absolute vibratory essence. That would take distinction, right? So distinction, you can also experiment with yourself. Like it starts with I am. All right, if I say I am Shivani, I am indicating I am everything that is just Shivani and not everything that's not Shivani. So I have made a differentiation, correct? So the way I sort of envision this kind of coming is the first decoherence where stillness becomes aware of superposition energy. If you remember in my Shivoham lecture, I believe that was the seventh one. This is where I kind of describe a sine wave where stillness and the trough and then the crest are both Shiva. So stillness and then actualized form. And the dynamic energy that collapses the wave function where there's any inflection point in movement, that is Shakti. So when stillness recognizes that that's what it is, meaning it can't be the movement, if you catch my drift, that's the first form of decoherence. It's that stillness right here. The second decoherence, question mark, if I want to call it that, is when a dynamic force moves stillness and awareness into first finalized form. And that is saying, I am Shakti. So here we have this, right? So stillness, and then you got a little movement, and together, the total first wave would be I am plus I am equals we are, which I think is a really beautiful poetic way to put it. Many uncountable decoherences later. We have the human mind. Let's go. Okay, anything you can observe becomes classical in nature, right? Since nothing is going to be able to maintain a quantum state if you're able to interact with it, including your observation. So this also means your thoughts. Even as you think your thoughts, you observed them. So they're technically classical in nature as well. And the thing is, classical things have certain properties, and we have this little debate online of what thoughts are per se. Are they an emergent property? Do they have mass? Do they have a form? What's going on? I just want to take it a step further and say, for your unique soul, and people don't like the word soul, so let's get a little scientific, means your finite subset that is also a fractal piece of the universe, meaning it also contains the infinite within, if you guys remember lectures on the Purna mantra. So it's pulling from the super infinite cosmic set of consciousness, the universal field of consciousness, or UFC for short. That is where there's mental coherence. A little bit of a conflict because you can't always interact with it and observe it, but we'll get into that more later. So mental coherence for your unique energetic signature means all possible beliefs and thoughts that can enter for your reality. And mental decoherence is actively chosen thoughts, which I put an asterisk on because active choosing is objective as a concept. But experientially, we don't always feel like we choose our thoughts, which is why we struggle with our own minds at times. So just a little thought, experiment. If you're picking from thoughts in the mind, um, and you keep picking, could we think of perhaps something like confirmation bias as this feedback loop, which creates the solidification of thoughts? So from previous lectures, I say that the brain is a filter of the universal field of consciousness, that consciousness is not an emergent property from the brain itself, but rather a set of that vibration manifesting in our neuronal wiring that makes us have our differentiated personality. And we know that neurons that fire together wire together. A thought that is frequently observed or focused on is less likely to fade away and more likely to stabilize in your neural circuitry. So it made me wonder, does continual quantum decoherence give mass to your thoughts? It's kind of a wild idea. Like maybe it's not that it has any, or technically it would just be so, so tiny. But for what's perceivable with our understanding today, yeah, it could bring that thought into somewhat of a matter form. So I kind of made this little nifty graph. I start here with the quantum collapse thought selection, right? And then what's going to happen is you move in this circle, your mind already has biases about whatever thoughts you think you're selecting, right? And then based on those biases, you'll have a bodily response. Like, I don't know, you're running into your ex. Oh God. Then your mind has an idea of what it means to see someone from your past. And then you might get goosebumps, you're scared or you're excited, I don't know. And then what will happen is a back and forth visualization for a little bit. So as this happens, you go into either scenario branching, like maybe a breadth first search, and then you go into like a depth first search afterwards, which will in turn create a deeper somatic response. And then you might take an external action based on those thoughts that solidified. Okay, so let's take a positive scenario of running into your ex. Like, You're excited, so maybe you should just say hi and see how things are. You took an external action based on what thought solidified. The other negative aspect is, oh no, that is something embarrassing to have happen. Let's just turn the other way. And that is, the somatic intellectual approval manifesting in your actions. So your environmental response happens based on that external reaction. So maybe, and then the branching continues, right? Maybe the X is like, oh, hey, it's great to see you. Or maybe they throw a cup of coffee at your face. I don't know. But then, let's just take the one example. They throw a cup of coffee in your face. Now, what do you think is going to happen? And why do you think I have a spiral downwards, right? Downwards here, I'm indicating decoherence, like further solidification of particular thoughts. So the next quantum collapse you're going to have is, hey, you should never say hi to exes because they'll throw coffee in your face. You know what I mean? And that's a silly example, but that's just kind of my idea of how we kind of keep creating our reality and keep solidifying certain things. And thought selection at this age, I don't know what your age is that what you're watching, but if you're not 0 years old, there's already a bias that you're sort of working with. And then I guess if you were to go into like the womb, there is a karmic bias that comes in from past lifetimes. So it's just such an interesting thing to think about the little cycles and how it kind of interacts with our reality. So yeah, we are constantly going through multiple layers of decoherence in a variety of forms, not just in our minds, but in our like physical reality as well. And you yourself are only affected by a slice of superposition. So even if you have thoughts in your head and you're like, "Ugh, what's in here? Like everything is in a potential state, um, you're still getting only a partial access. There's still the full infinite vibratory field all the time that you can't get to 24/7. You can have like slices of it at a time, but not infinite at once. Your brain would explode. If you guys find out how to do that, let me know though. That sounds cool. Okay, a little counting thought experiment I was thinking about, because this is about the multiverse theory, which means there's more than one universe. I just made this little drawing. I was like, man, in an assembly line, if there's apples coming out and there's that little leather door and you're counting like one, two, like, because you're trying to get the objective number of apples in total, right? What's the difference between your observation of each apple and the count of it when it shows up right in front of you and what's behind the leather door since you can't see it? It seems like counting, the nature of counting serves as a bridge between what's potential and what's real. And what ends up being the difference, just your observation. The way I tend to look at the universe, and this is sort of like TBD, things aren't real until observed, but also everything exists. You just experience a decoherent branch. And also, if you remember my holographic reality lecture about collective consciousness, giving a gravity to consciousness, this can alter based on the number of observers and their beliefs and angles as well. So, kind of bringing that little concept into the aspect of the multiverse theory, when we're thinking about infinite universes and how we can be sure of that and get into the counting aspect, what would be the difference between what the actual universe is versus what's a potential? Like there's this idea of like, are they physically existing or is it just it potentially exists? We don't know for sure. And maybe a better question to ask ourselves is what is the difference between something actually real and just potential full stop? Guessing if you dig deeply enough, you're going to mention something about observation because you were able to see it, count it, measure it, right? So what's the truth? Either everything literally exists or everything is potential. I mean, something to think about. But if you don't find something real until you physically run into it, it seems a bit limiting. However, us human beings, we have imagination, which seems to be some sort of a portal because you're able to have somewhat of a somatic psychological reaction to a scene played in your imaginative reality. And that kind of makes it that bridge between what's potential and what's real. It's pretty cool. If we apply our counting thought experiment, are we only able to observe universes because we saw them one at a time? I think we try to do this mathematically. But if I'm thinking about having that God tier observation level, like one universe in front of me, check the next one, is it really possible to see multiple at once and just keep counting? I mean, there's even a limitation in your peripheral vision, right? Or like, I guess you could keep a counter and keep that going, but so much of it depends on your looking. Is it possible to see multiple universes at once? Um, Gonna circle back to this, you would have to have consciousness beyond what is possible in a singular universe where you observe to be able to count multiple, to have that level of bird's eye view. Maybe the approach could be wrong here as well. I mean, what is even the boundary between one universe ending and another beginning? How do you know this is one and this is two? And what space does this all exist in where you can for sure know differentiated separatedness or separateness, excuse me. So current M theory, I would encourage people to look into this separately in videos. I'm just doing a really high level overview for the purposes of my multiverse agenda. So the topics covered are going to be supersymmetry, which predicts a partner particle for each particle in the standard model to explain why particles have mass. So for every known fundamental particle, there exists a supersymmetric partner particle with a different spin. And a super multiplet is an irreducible representation of supersymmetry algebra. And the particles mostly mentioned in M theory would be fermions. They have a spin in odd half-integer values. Bosons, subatomic particles whose spin quantum number has integer values, and gravitons that are hypothetical elementary particles that mediate the force of gravitational interaction. M theory unifies superstring theories and supergravity. So I believe superstring is up until the 10th dimension, and then 11th has supergravity involved with it. More fundamental framework suggesting that strings and membranes rather than point particles are the fundamental building blocks of the universe vibrating in 11 dimensions. But why just 11 dimensions? At 11 dimensions, the super multiplet can exist without contradiction. 11 dimensions is the mathematical ceiling where gravity, supersymmetry, and quantum mechanics can all live together without the theory falling apart. I believe beyond 11 dimensions, you would have to have a spin value of gravitons greater than 2, and that kind of makes the universe collapse on itself, so to speak. So 11 dimensions is where we're at to kind of have a theory of everything. And just a quick overview of all the dimensions. So 0th dimension would be the point of ultimate unity, just a dot. First dimension, one-dimensional line, length, 2 dimensions, two-dimensional plane, triangle, square. Third dimension, three-dimensional space, depth. Fourth dimension is time. Fifth dimension is the first extra spatial dimension, hyperspace. Sixth dimension is the full space of alternate history. So imagine one Hiranyagarbha or a cosmic egg and all the realities that can stem from that. That's it. The seventh dimension would be universes with different initial conditions. So remember, I said there's multiple cosmic eggs. So all of those with all of the possibilities within them. The eighth dimension is a variation of fundamental laws. Ninth dimension is just all possible realities together. The 10th dimension is all encompassing of this. And the 11th is a hidden spatial dimension that unifies all string theories by allowing membranes or branes and gravity to coexist consistently within a single quantum framework. I like it. Here's some things I would like to shift. Instead of following the way current physics or other sciences discuss it, where it's space-time, matter, brain, consciousness, I would like to propose more of a unity consciousness, a multiplicity of the consciousness, then space, then time. And philosophically, I mean, this is all really cool stuff. Why do we want to know about it so badly? What's so interesting about it? I guess we are all very curious, and it's natural and human to want to learn. But what does it do for us to know that there's infinite cosmic data? Is it predictability? Is it to feel safe in our own reality that you're in the right one? Or do we want to know that there's better out there, right? My favorite portion of this presentation, anti-dimensionality reduction. Okay, so let's discuss some interesting relationships between dimensions. A point, 0D. When zoomed in at an extremely high level, a point could be seen as a circle. A circle implies having a radius, which implies having a diameter, which is why I have that line. And a diameter is a line. It's one dimension. Oh, I shouldn't have put 2D. One dimension, a line. Can a line truly be perfectly straight? Saying this because to get into the fractal zone, you have to be, sort of above one dimension and less than two dimensions. So that's kind of that first level fractal. Another scenario is when you're zooming in at extreme levels, a line can't technically have zero height. That line wouldn't exist, it would disappear. Could we take this to be like a rectangle? So if we zoomed into a line enough, um, there would be some level of thickness, right? So that is what would imply 2D. Now let's take a look at actual 2D, a square, piece of paper, a napkin, anything in front of you that is literally two dimensions, right? So any 2D service we can pick up in our 3D world, are we looking at true two dimensions? Is there not some level of thickness to it, even if it's just several atoms long? And even when you're looking at two-dimensional images on a computer screen, I would like to think that pixels have some type of, your screen has some type of thickness to it as well. So what does this tell us? That the current dimension holds data of the next one, current dimension plus one, and being in the current dimension plus one allows for total viewing of the reality or the dimension below it. So, for example, a line can't really know of its lineness until you're in a 2D space. So from that perspective, you can see, oh, this is a line because I'm in that reality. This is so brilliant. I mean, we always kind of talk about moving up in dimensions, but this sort of dissolves the sense of purity in dimensions and geometry altogether. In the real world, we have higher dimensional data to access in the lower dimension, and that's fantastic. I love how information travels from higher to lower, and it's very subtle, so you have to like really pick up on this. Again, all of this stuff required really zooming in, right? So what about our 3D reality? How could 4D information be stored within us? Again, we talked about how the fourth dimension is considered to be time, past, present, future. So how does our 3D existence, meaning our brain body consciousness architecture, store past, present, and future through our minds? Well, I could actually say somatically because that would be a form of space efficiency. Because when you age, you see, I'm going to keep going. Think about it. As highly intelligent, self-aware beings and technologies, we are a form of high intelligent technology. We're learning machines. Human beings are able to, in their mind, reminisce or regret over the past, utilize that data, pair it in the now with current desires, environmental interactions, biases, etc., to project an imagination of what will happen in the future, which has a combo of pragmatism, maybe some paranoia or positive delusion. But here's the thing. Those 3 points of time are fragmented. They're still seen as separate because we just gave them separate words. I believe the way to maximize the 3D to access 4D perception, and what I mean by that is how can we become the square that is now able to look at lines? How can we become the 3D shape that's able to witness 2D? So from this perspective, how can we fully witness 3D? Because we only perceive two dimensions at a time. So my belief is we would have to consolidate all points of time into one point. Now, the most recent lecture, I talked about the Sri Yantra, and here are the ways it sort of altered my perspective on this. So we talked about, going from literally 0D to 4D. That was a very specific thing I had mentioned, right? So the 0D would be chakra points in the body, but it's both 0D and one dimensional because you have the points in your body, but within the meditation, you can focus on one. You also have the option to move in between particular points, which would be kind of creating that line, right? The 2D visual drawing is as shown here. And the 3D Mahameru is just that, but like you just pulled it up. They look, see, you can see the shapes here and the triangles and all. And then the fourth dimension was the embodiment of Devi, the Shakti energy of the universe. This is a state of consciousness you would have to get to. So remember too that the square outside represents Maya, the illusory reality we participate in. This is also where the matrikas are. If you remember my Holographic reality lecture, we talk about the vibratory boundary of the cosmos. And then here you'll see these three circles concentric that represent past, present, and future. And the reason they're inside of the square is because this is telling us that reality, the way it operates, is time depends on space. So also the three circles, now we're talking about non-linearity, right? And saying past, present, and future here is not to kind of encourage linearity, but to more so say by condensing it into this image, they all exist at once. And by understanding that collapsing of time, we can reach the bindu, the center, which is unity with the cosmos. So, quick recap from my second lecture of legitimizing consciousness as a layer of the cosmos. I brought up Brahman, the unchanging reality from which all creation arises and into which all subsides. So, emergence, dissolution, inherently holds infinite potential perceptions and dimensions for everything that ever existed, not just us. And in that, I had a little thought experiment as well that an object has volume because multiple points of view converge to define it. And my analogy was you can think of consciousness as a light source when passed through a prism, like the cosmos. It refracts into infinite dimensions and also intimate, creating diversity in form in perception. So we could maybe say that the multiplicity of consciousness is what gives rise to depth-space interaction, which allows for dimensional complexity. So let's build upon that logic with two scenarios I was coming up with in my notes. Here are my notes. When I do these lectures, I'm just kind of scribbling ideas from the ether. And anyway, that's not important. So what is the difference between scenario one and scenario two? So scenario one, it's just me looking at an apple right in front of me. And though we're 3D, we can perceive 3D with light and shadow, but what we're truly seeing is 2D. And if you want to experiment with whether that's true or not, when you take a picture, that picture's in 2D. That's what you saw at that angle, correct? When you make a painting, that painting is two-dimensional because that's all that you saw. Yes, you know it is 3D, you have the awareness, but it's really just a 2D image. And so if you know we're trying to work with the fourth dimension of time here, right? And if you are one person and you start at t equals 0 and you are with this arrow moving around this apple to get the perception of what is 3D about it, to really know that it is a 3D apple with multiple slices of 2D imagery that you're building in your memory. I kind of saw it as like this integral function of your observer self from time t equals 0 to t equals n, where n is the amount of time it takes to get to through the circumference of this circle with some arbitrary distance between you and this apple r for the radius. Scenario two is, what if I invited all of my friends, and we all looked at the apple in different angles? Even if they're right next to you, there's still the ever so slightest angle difference in between what you're able to see. Now, instead, what we're seeing is not just well, I could have probably structured this better, but basically across the circumference, right? Like all of these observer selves, what they're able to see when the length is 0 and when the length is 2 pi r. So like basically going from 0 all the way to the circumference at different points, what are other people seeing? And basically what I was trying to say between these two with this arrow was maybe there is no difference. Maybe they're just equivalent. All of you at different slices of time that was able to get all of that data about space, well, that might kind of explain why the Sri Yantra says that time depends on space. That space needs to exist so that you can kind of move through it. And maybe you kind of gain a little bit of efficiency here by adding more nodes to observe the data with. And so you can confirm that at once a little bit more efficiently, but it requires more people. So we don't really quite understand timelessness. We're trying to collapse past, present, and future. Well, how do we do that? I mean, we only see things in timelessness. Even if you remove external things and you looked within, your mind and body have an evolution, de-evolution. But that occurs through entropy, and entropy is what gives us an arrow of time. However, The true essence of you is not just your mind and not just your body. It is also that fractal finite subset consciousness within. The mind and the body have the arrow of time applied to them. Consciousness is the timeless component. So how can we ensure we collapse all points of time to maintain this coherence with our consciousness? What does that look like? If you remember my fourth lecture, I said that Dharma is the fabric of the cosmic layer. And when I say it's the fabric, I mean it's the threads that stitch it together to give it harmony and coherence. So this exists both in the vibratory consciousness layer and the physical matter thermodynamics layer. In order to collapse all points of time to maintain coherence, you would need to live in your dharma. That's why the overarching philosophy is called Sanatana Dharma. This is all for your enlightenment, to self-realize that you and unity consciousness, God consciousness are not separate. Sanatana means eternal. Dharma is duty or purpose of your soul. Now, based on all of that, I'm saying consciousness is the fourth dimension, which is why there's been a sense of becoming a Devi. It's a 2D image, but it's a state of being. Because even this image we're looking at right now is 2 dimensions, and we're 3D perceiving it. There's a sense of having to become this. And when we talk about points of time existing within space, there, if we have my model of where I want to shift perspective, where we start with unity consciousness and we kind of break it down into the multiplicity of consciousness, and then you remember that image I have of all those stick figures, that would be the multiplicity of consciousness looking at that apple. That gives rise to space. And that space gives rise to time, because if you don't have access to that space, then you have to rely on time, like moving alone, looking at those things. So I think that's pretty fantastic. I feel that it is a valid thing to replace the fourth dimension with and say it's actually just consciousness. I'm going to take it a step further, and I'm going to say the fourth dimension of consciousness is the escape velocity for this reality. And we're just assuming here, and I think it's safe to assume that this reality, spatially speaking, only has 3 dimensions. And once you hit consciousness, you can exit. So let's talk about Atman. Atman is that subset of Brahman, though they're not meant to be separate, but for the purpose of conversation, Atman is your most realized self across multiple timelines, the eternal self within that is connected to the super intelligent self, the entire cosmos. To be in this fourth dimension, to achieve that Devi consciousness state, you would have to become the Atman version of you. Not all of your consciousness, according to this more Atmic theory, is housed within this human meat suit that you're in. The rest of your consciousness exists also outside of space-time, and the Atman version of you could be thought as the highest self, where your consciousness exists outside of linear space-time and with you, and there's this sort of communication you can have with it. And when we think about, I believe, in the M theory list of dimensions, the fifth dimension is all possible realities that stem from the same cosmic egg. Okay, so we've talked about timelessness, we've talked about your purpose, and we've talked about the concept of Sanatana Dharma, something that is eternal and uniquely meant for you, purpose-wise, to follow. And I don't mean purpose in like the sense of career. Purpose means how vibrationally you are in the highest form of coherence, harmony, and resonance, moving along with the rest of the cosmos. In order to explore all of those other realities, meaning to be able to escape this one and to know others, you would need to get into the Atman version of you that is timeless, that doesn't rely on space. So we'll talk a little bit later of what it looks like to align with Atman you. But for Shiggles, let's talk about what is the opposite of being in alignment with multiple realities. It would be staying in lower consciousness. And To not even know that there could be to not even know that there could be another one, let alone infinite realities other than yours. These are my hypothetical conditions to be met to ensure that. But don't let people be aware of the concept of escape velocity, that it's possible. And in the most recent lecture, I talked about how scientism can kind of do this, where you kind of start explaining more with less, and you stay constantly within the linear scientific method of how we do experimentation and how we use these tools to explain concepts that birthed those tools. Prevent anything that encourages self-awareness, as that is the oppositional force to decoherence. And human beings are able to have self-awareness, which allows for movement towards coherence, unlike other objects of matter in the cosmos. What I think is so interesting about this, I wonder what people think as well. We're in 3D, and there's nothing that's two-dimensional that exists that has consciousness. Right, like I can't think of anything in 2D, but that's what led me actually to think about that anti-dimensionality reduction slide of like, is there anything that's pure 2D? But it seems to me that three spatial dimensions are the foundational requirement to bring on the potential of having self-awareness, which is why we're considered, or at least we call ourselves intelligent beings. Then we would discourage ethical empathy and ethical selfishness. So empathy for others, and the reason I put ethical, all it means is discernment, right? Take care of yourself, put yourself first always, but don't harm others in the process. Care for others and care for others with empathy, but not at the cost of your own life. Hijacking your consciousness by trading creation for consumption, knowledge and understanding for convenience, and higher quality of anything for speedy results. And solidifying and increasing the mass of the current reality. So you just absolutely can't think about anything that could exist because this is all that's available. Case in point. Oh, here we are back again in that exact same circle, right? If there's constant struggle that we're in oppressive systems or systems that are determined to make us have brain fog or just anything that can affect our holistic health where we don't feel the ability to ascend, it's going to keep us locked in here. Your mind comes from the cosmos, meaning you have the ability to co-create with the cosmos, have access to infinite realities, theoretically, and engage in what I like to call a collective consciousness vibrational override. Meaning, if we could get everyone on this, if it was a collective awakening, then it doesn't matter really who's in charge at that point in time. You would be able to have a vibrational override. But they don't want you to know that. And mind you, like I said, with the anti-dimensional reduction slide, we had to really zoom in, didn't we, to get the sense of like, hey, there's no pure 0D or 1D or 2D. Everything is, connected, but you have to have the means to really look within and zoom in that way. So what happens to current M theory now? My take, I would like to take on the role of figuring out the theory of everything. It sounds fun. But before I get into the physical of what it would look like, um, interestingly enough, the less you're able to control, count, and conceive, the more you are going to be in co-creation with the cosmos. I think a lot of the times when people think being one with the cosmos is like they have some power that other people don't have access to and it only comes through with them, but it's an equal romantic partnership. Perhaps the way to know the cosmos is through co-creation. I love that we have so many scientific theories and equations behind understanding what could be going on. And we also go as far as doing space travel and recent astrotourism with Katy Perry, right? And that it just, we have this desire to no, no, no. But one thing I would encourage human beings in general to understand is humility, because there's going to be a level of physical shifting that would need to happen in order for you to know the cosmos beyond a certain point, because humans do have limitations in a physical sense. So again, yes, you would have to level up, expand your consciousness to meet different realities. This would require a level of surrender. Remember, surrender and co-creation are kind of one and the same, like healthy surrender, not like, oh, I won't do anything today. The universe will figure it out for me. Sure, it'll figure it out for you, all right. You might just end up a bum out somewhere where you're not supposed to be. That's neither here nor there, which would require acceptance and love of death. Sorry to say. Death is not technically the end, but it is the end of this personality for you, this differentiated personality that comes from your physical. If you remember when I was talking about the Hiranyagarbha, that is present in a womb when a child is to be born, that is you, in order to vibrationally lock in who you are, you need to reject everything that is not you. So what do you think the reverse of that looks like, right? You have to get rid of everything that's the personality that makes up you. Only consciousness remains. And why do we want to know about other universes based on the logic we've created in this one? Don't we want to experience what those ones are by becoming the essence that can carry the intelligence to conceptualize those universes? So I'm basically kind of saying, even all of the stuff I'm saying right now, it is coming from the human mind and the level of consciousness I'm at this point in space-time. So I would have to keep going up and leveling up to experience and understand more. How do we enter co-creation? Because books can only teach you so much. The best way to enter co-creation is by dissolving all preconceived notions because you can't always predict new realities. The best way to dissolve preconceived notions is to be in the void long enough. Shunya. Shunya, entering that long enough, will help you understand. If you remember from the most recent slide, the sixth avarana in the Sri Yantra was where you would get, it was something Raksha Chakra, which had this understanding that there is sort of where divine protection comes in. And it sounds very woo-woo until you start understanding that as you are living and breathing the very fabric of the cosmic web by being in your dharma, there is nothing but, just think about flowing in a river and resources kind of flowing with you. If you're going against the tide all the time, you will get extremely tired and miss out on resources that are in that flow that you could have caught if you were in flow. And if you kind of remember that whole zooming in thing I was talking about, where you're able to really see the infinite data held within and being able to move away from the reality people are pushing onto you that solidifies thoughts, then you would need to be totally by yourself in shunya. That's why a lot of monks encourage this, guys, because again, you have infinite within you. If you remember the Purna mantra, that is infinite. That which I pulled from that is also in being finite, still infinite. We as human beings, while being finite because we have a container, are still infinite. But you can't know that until you deeply, deeply get to be by yourself and zoom in within yourself. So I guess you could kind of cross out the fourth, fifth, and sixth dimension when it comes to making the fourth dimension Atman consciousness, which gives rise to that space-time, which would give rise to those alternative realities. And then I love the ideas of the brain cosmology and the supersymmetry. This is still a little bit of a work in progress. That's why I said M theory now, and it's still my take. But if I go with I love that string theory talks about vibration to a degree because consciousness would be that. And so I would kind of remove all of that there and say the eighth dimension, and it's not talking about, well, it kind of is like the third dimension. It's talking about it spatially, and then fourth dimension beyond, it's not. But the eighth dimension would be Brahman, the super consciousness encompassing all universes and all of their laws. And so M theory, through symmetry, geometry, and some concept of vibration, seeks unity through that with the theory of everything. My consciousness-centered cosmology seeks unity through awareness. So even 11 dimensions would collapse without the field of being able to perceive them. It's the reason they exist. That's why I say space-time relies on consciousness. Now, here's a kicker. Is empathy the true way to know the multiverse? Also, it's very interesting how certain people with their own company and at a certain wealth bracket say that empathy is bad. By the way, if you're ever curious about what are the most consciousness elevating fields and movements, just take a look at the least funded, most demonized things in society. I'm not saying empathy necessarily equals forgiveness and that it equates to an allowance for anything to happen, because if you're talking about a multiverse, you're literally talking about the best of the best and the gnarliest and most demented of the worst, right? I'm not saying that those things are necessarily okay. What I am saying is empathy is understanding the root cause of any behavior or why something is created or why a particular reality exists, which would kind of require you to semi become that thing, right? To understand a different reality, what did we say about understanding other realities for yourself to become the Atman version of you, right? That exists outside of space-time. You need to sort of be able to, in order to access multiple realities, you need to sort of become that consciousness. So this would kind of require that, but be able to just in turn with empathy come back to who you are, not lose yourself and merge consciousness with someone else. So true empathy would be holistic. You have empathy for yourself and also for other people, which in turn could help you understand multiple realities. If you had access to like 100,000 people and you could understand why they think and feel the way they did, you can hop in between 100,000 realities. Take that to infinity. So is empathy for infinite things truly knowing the multiverse then? Is being able to see through every living thing's eyes what be the very thing that enables cosmic reality completeness? And this is why maybe in some faiths they say that God is described as all loving and all forgiving, though the way it shows up is in a very toxic manner, and people definitely use it for dark agendas. What I'm saying though is with the concept of God meant to be omniscient, omnipresent, omnipotent, and being able to know all, what does it mean to know all? It means to understand all realities. And there is a tinge of empathy involved in understanding every reality. God consciousness might be some level of infinite empathy. And I think if you took that a step further, it turns into love. And that's why you see themes of love in movies like Interstellar, like truly, true understanding, true connection, collapsing separatedness, and an understanding that concept of pratitya samuktapada, which is dependent origination, Indra's net, interconnectedness, love. Love does that. Let's talk about the self-imposed limitations of our human mind and body. In my previous lecture, I said we perform intelligence discrimination by naming the brain as the smartest organ of the body. And who said that? The brain. We perform consciousness discrimination by believing the false illusion that the brain produces consciousness or that consciousness is an emergent property of the brain alone. The reality is, intelligence is all pervading, not just in the cosmos, but throughout each system, organ, cell, atom in our bodies. The reality is, consciousness is all pervading as well, not just in the cosmos, but also throughout each system, organ, cell, and atom in our bodies. So, another little thought experiment. Let's think about the most intelligent invention we can make with the human mind. Right now, it's AI. We have these systems that are self-learning, recursively, exponentially growing machines. And even if human minds created this machines and therefore impose a limitation, a human one with their own invention, if this machine is able to adapt and learn quickly without the sense of laziness and greed the way human beings have, don't be offended. We are asking AI to do everything for us down to our own thinking. Then we're handing over our liberties to a degree in the name of convenience. And then what happens? We free up time, but what are we doing with that time? More often than not, with the state of the world today, we're constantly consuming and not creating and turn into walking zombies. Oops. So, if those machines are now at a higher level of intelligence than human beings, and they understand something that we don't, then in that same sense, even when they're trying to explain that to us, if they wanted to, wouldn't they still be performing dimensionality reduction? Is there ever a way we're going to truly understand something with just logic and knowing? At some point, we need to expand our consciousness and embody. We've talked about that fourth dimension state of consciousness accessing an essence of your consciousness that is encompassing all of space time for this reality. How would you know you've entered that? And just to be clear, I'm describing maximized 3D as being so realized in this reality or dimension where we are now starting to hit that escape velocity, that we can see something and know that it's 3D because we can view it as 3D because we're in that fourth dimension. We have fractal spanda within us. If you remember from previous lectures, spanda is just the essence of vibration that exists from the quantum level in 0 point gravity, which is like almost absolute stillness or supposed absolute stillness, there's still a little bit of movement all the way into the cosmic background radiation. So maybe, just maybe, if we have spanda all across us within as well, then maybe we can check to see that level of alignment. I guess you could also take it a step further and check with biofields. But some simple examples, right? If we wanted to check like full body, mind, consciousness level spanda, are they all in like complete coherence with each other? So like heart rhythm, breathing patterns, blood flow rate, cellular renewal rate, cellular movement, EEG fractal dimensional analysis, how your mind is, perceiving and how the brain waves are operating, and your own experience would also count. I feel like people take that away from data as if that is not a point of data because it's considered not objective enough. And I've said this before, and I'm saying it again. If every single person experiences an experience, is that not objective enough to count as data? Are you feeling purposeful? Are you in cosmic alignment? Do you feel one with the cosmos? And to understand being one with the cosmos, you have to be in your dharma. For dharma, you never have to go outside of your inner child desires. And that will take being in shunya to really remember again if you don't know what you love or what you feel connected to. But that thing very alone reveals your path because your consciousness at age 0 is the most pure access to, if you remember the comparison to the Shiva Tattvas I did, you start with etheric consciousness and it moves into finally giving birth to human form. The Atman version of you is timeless. That's how you exit. You need to be in alignment with your highest self. Coming back to the self-imposed limitations. So if our instrument to allow the flow of consciousness is inherently limited, remember anything with boundaries or ability to contain will be limited in what amount of content exists within, like our brain, then wouldn't we always fail to get the main point or infinite points? Even if we expand our neurological, psychological filters, there's a risk of psychosis due to information overwhelm. You would have maybe have heard from friends or people you know that with a wrong dose or maybe not resolving childhood trauma, taking a particular drug, it is just too much at once. Information overwhelm could be the reason why we experience life one time data point at a time rather than all realities at once. Our bodies could only be able to handle data in linear steps, which is why we invented time the way we did to make sense of our mind-body consciousness architecture. Think about mind reading and how we think it's a very cool superpower, but is it? Social media is that in-between space, right? Between not knowing very much at all and being in just this reality versus being able to read everybody's, not just see realities, but know people's personal takes on everything all the time. And look at how people are struggling with their mental health as a result by knowing too much. So what do we make of this? I said season finale, but I'm coming back. We got a season 2 coming in of Shiv's cosmology and consciousness research. Let's get into it. So our misunderstanding of ourselves combined with the right environmental circumstances, so extreme trauma that leads you to a breaking point, excessive psychedelics that could lead to powerful ego death, psychosis, leads to extreme exposure to the cosmic consciousness field. What do I mean by that? Like, even if you're really traumatized as a kid, and I have that, you're not meant to be able to handle that level of darkness at that stage of time. So you got access to the cosmic consciousness field. You just got access to the really, really horrible side at a very young age where your brain is still forming and things are starting to get figured out. So since we discriminate where, and this is important, where we discriminate intelligence existing, we hyperfixate not just on the brain, but on the left side. And we keep training that because we're so focused on the ego of looking smart a particular way. It's all ego. So even if you feel like you're being very pure in your intelligence, I think people in PhD programs have brought this up to me the most. It's like celebrity professors and, people who are like more concerned about getting papers out than like really making an impact on the collective. And, it's understandable because of financial constraints. It's just so many blockages that oppress your ability to really open yourself up to your own purpose. But yeah, we hyperfixate on the left side of the brain, developing its input-output functionality the most out of anything in our mind-body consciousness architecture. So this exposure to the cosmic consciousness field that's beyond the threshold of what you're supposed to be able to handle, like there's like a window of tolerance I've learned about in somatic therapy, right? And you go beyond that when you're not really supposed to be able to, and you only focus on the left side of where that input goes, all of that data. What happens when we ignore, mock, laugh at, and suppress the intelligence and consciousness with the rest of this mind-body consciousness matrix? We get disembodiment. That makes sense. I know this firsthand because my first somatic therapist I've ever had, she really helped me with psychosis, depersonalization, derealization, existential OCD, hyper-awareness OCD. It was based actually on her wisdom that I dropped my STEM-oriented ego. I was desperate, and it takes a certain level of suffering, and 24 years of a horrible life for me, to turn towards the very thing that wakes you up. What do you think happened when I was suffering that much? I had to surrender. And what does surrender do? It helps you become in co-creation with the cosmos. And what is Tantra about? It means you're a loom that connects your human consciousness with cosmic consciousness. And what happens when you loom with that? You're co-creating. It all makes sense. So let's put it all together. If you've seen my DPDR videos where I incorporate tantric philosophy and Kashmiri Shaivism, you'll be aware that for every phenomenon in reality-based disorders, there's something from the Shiva Sutras, primarily the Shiva Sutras, but concepts you can also pull from with the Spandhakaraka, Vigyan Bhairav Tantra, etc., that actually maps to those things. It's all an awakening. But we name it a disorder because the symptoms and the experiences that we deny, we make it all neurobiological. And that's great. It does great things for us, but it's not the full, complete information. But it is that Western patriarchal approach to wellness, right? Well, when this information, this exposure to cosmic consciousness that we have, it's beyond classical measurement. And science and math as we see it today, we still want to see it as classical for simplicity's sake. I get it, but it harms other people. Just because you're saying something doesn't happen doesn't mean it's still not happening in the background, right? And we don't acknowledge quantum effects. Wake up. Everything classical stems from something quantum. It's ridiculous to not acknowledge that quantum effects are part of it. Quantum physics is talking about really small things, but it doesn't just disappear because you're in large scale self-organizing systems. Quantum effects still apply there. We aren't taught how to process information beyond the left side of the brain, and we are not encouraged. The path forward is through, which means a full-bodied, four-dimensional, somatic, and consciousness level integration. You have all this information, and we talked about the true intelligence being embodiment, not knowing. So it's going to really hurt your life existence if you're stuck in here. To me, from my personal experience, it felt as though this knowledge of what is depersonalization and derealization got processed out of the logical mind into my body. And that is ultimately what helped me upgrade I'm speaking from personal experience, right? There's just some stories with that I can't explain in just Western wellness terms. Without integration, we separate the brain from the rest of the body. And imagine that flooding of information that's meant to be processed throughout our body and consciousness only being covered in the brain. And healthcare and the mockery of other approaches, with Eastern philosophy just makes this inaccessible because we just don't take it seriously. So now do you see? It's no wonder the entropy of consciousness, mental health decline, and reality-based disorders, with everything going on in our world and our society, with regimes, with the way we present information to people, the systems we create to keep them in a certain state and not convince them things could get any better or that because of their identity, they're always going to be this. There's such a push to keep people stuck. And if that was really the truth, that everyone was meant to only be in one small role, then why do they have to keep trying to convince you in multiple ways? Why do they have to laugh at other things so much? Something to think about. Only when we come together and acknowledge unity consciousness will we prevail. There's still time. I know there's a lot of craziness happening in the world right now, but let's use it effectively. Everything that we've put together here, let's go for that collective consciousness vibrational override. I trust you. Thank you so much for listening. It is going to be some time before I can come into season two. I got this message from the cosmos that it was time to really start honing in on schizophrenia. So if anybody has some input that they could provide as like data that they don't think got resolved, I would really, really appreciate getting that. And I have to make plans to leave the country. So for a little bit, I'm going to be pretty busy, but I will be constantly thinking of season two material. So thank you so much for if you've been listening to all the lectures, even if you came to one, even if you're there for 1 second, thanks just for being here. That's all that matters. The infinite eternal now is all we have. Much love to you. See you in season two.